You said something really interesting a minute ago about if you hear hoofs, think horses, not zebras. And then you referenced some of the more unusual, statistically, I'm assuming you're saying, conditions like don't think, maybe autism spectrum, but think fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I think it's interesting for folks at home to understand what incidence is around CFS, FMS in children, younger populations. If you're thinking, or if you're saying to us that these are really much more common than we believe.
At this moment, we know that approximately 6% of the entire population has fibromyalgia.
Children and adults?
That's right, 6%. Whoa. That in the United States alone, we're talking about 20 million people. Yeah. Now, if you understand all immune-related diseases in the United States, it could be as high as 180 million if you add all the diseases. So I'm familiar with approximately 10 diseases. We're talking about fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and chronic pain, mental depression, chronic anxiety, brain fog, sleeplessness, long COVID, and interstitial cystitis, which is a urologic problem. So if you add all those problems together, you're looking between 150 and 180 million Americans who may have one of these immune dysfunctional processes. And it's not hard to understand. You don't need to go to Dr. Google, all right? You can go to a free website called PubMed, pubmed.gov, and just put in the disease and then put in microbiome or immune system, and you'll be amazed how many articles are available that you can understand.
Sure. Showing the origin, the link, the connection between these chronic inflammatory, diseases that have a common origin.
Well, they're not necessarily inflammatory. For example, fibromyalgia is not necessarily an inflammatory disease, and it's clearly not an autoimmune disease. In fibromyalgia, we have a defect in a particular type of white blood cell. It's called the peripheral blood mononuclear cell, and these cells are incapable of manufacturing normal quantities of 4 critical proteins. And in research that we published earlier this year in one of the world's most important journals, Nature, we've identified that 100% of people who test positive based upon our blood test have unique DNA genomic signatures. So that means that not only is it a real disease, unless, of course, you don't believe in DNA, but it also means that to understand how to manage the disease, you have to look at various pathways. For example, we can't change your DNA, right? If you have blue eyes, we can't give you brown eyes or vice versa, right? So there's lots of different diseases, and we need to make sure that when we are interested in treating these diseases, we understand these pathways. There are lots of medications on the market that have nothing to do with the immune system, but yet have been used or even approved for use. In fibromyalgia, there are 3 approved drugs. One is an anti-seizure medicine and 2 are antidepressant medicines, none of which have any immune benefits whatsoever.
You made an interesting supposition, observation. The kid that's in school doesn't want to participate in dodgeball. Because they're sensitive. But they're not just maybe non-athletic. They're physically, maybe even as well emotionally, because you're making the connection, you're sensitive. What are some of the other signs and signals? Of course, besides this wonderful paper, identification of unique genomic signatures in patients, so it's testable, we'll talk about that. But just observing your child, what are some of the other known signs and symptoms that parents at home can sort of think, this might actually be fibromyalgia with my child, not avoidance of dodgeball?
Well, before we use the word fibromyalgia, you need to understand that it's a made-up name. There is nothing wrong with the fibrous or connective tissue, nor the myalgic or muscle tissue. In fact, when people have undergone biopsies of areas where they have pain, we see no pathologic features whatsoever. It really should be called an immune deficiency disorder, because that's what it is, okay? Right. Fibromyalgia is a colloquial term, and it was given by doctors to particularly women who were complaining, and they just decided, we'll give them that name. We've had other names before that. There was fibrositis, was one of the other names. So we've had lots of names.
Or just hypochondriacal.
Or hypochondriasis. When I first got in the field, I was flabbergasted to go to support groups and hear over and over again how doctors ridiculed these patients for their illnesses. In these diseases, at least in adults, they look healthy, they seem healthy, so doctors discount the nature of their symptoms. Friends and family and even spouses will say there can't be anything wrong with you. And then, of course, there has never been anything curative or truly effective for therapy for these people. And as a consequence, these patients, at least as adults, have among the highest levels of suicide and suicidal ideation, exceeding mental depression, because doctors don't believe them, family and friends don't believe them, and they can't find any method to cope and deal with their diseases.
And the discomfort.
But getting back to your issue with children, I think that the first thing you should see is the level of activity of children. Are children showing a lot of energy, a lot of interest, okay? Those are important signs and symptoms. Do they want to join in activities both at school and in their home life? And do they complain about not sleeping well, or they feel depressed or seem anxious? These are common things that we can easily screen for. And fortunately for us, our blood test is highly accurate, and we've tested many children and have identified fibromyalgia. We don't find it in everybody with these symptoms, obviously, but we do see it in a sizable percentage of these children. And so screening is very important. Unfortunately, the pediatric population hasn't quite caught on about this in children, but it is clearly prevalent.
Sure. And could you speak then to sort of understanding this perspective, the prevalence of it, the sort of ambiguity of the signs and symptoms, and then in terms of you being able to identify it through a test, and then understanding, what mechanism of the immune system has actually gone awry that's allowed this to develop or developing?
Well, we have some working hypotheses.
Sure.
Obviously, there is something going on in the manufacturing of those peripheral blood mononuclear cells. So that's in the bone marrow. All right? And as I've already said, we know that people with the disease have a unique DNA genomic signature between 1 and 3, and 100% of them have those DNA signatures, okay?
Yep.
We're not able to change your DNA, but the prevalence of the symptoms is what you should look at, okay? If a child always seems depressed or anxious, okay? Before we start saying, it's because of issues with siblings or problems at school with other children, we should look at more organic causes, okay? More physiologic processes. That's what we should be looking at. Will we always see it as one of the diseases I've mentioned? Not necessarily, but we do have to be aware of the potential existence of this. That, as I said, these are diseases that are not gender specific and they're not age specific. The reason why we tend to see more people diagnosed who are elderly is because they have health insurance and can afford to work up the evaluation. That's really it. So they have Medicare, for example, so we see more elderly patients. But it's not a disease that is age-specific whatsoever. And if indeed we're dealing with a viral mechanism as triggering this, children get respiratory tract infections as often as adults, right?
Yep.
And based upon our linkage now between these same pathways and long COVID, that means that we have a linkage to a coronavirus. There are 7 human coronaviruses, and any of them potentially can be the source of an epigenetic change that can produce a side effect in children.
Gotcha. So something comes along, trips up the immune system, that glitch, that switch that happens then switches over to this other condition.
That's correct. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's something that the DNA triggers something that is reflected in what's going on in the bone marrow and in the production of these faulty white blood cells.
Got it.